the thing about it is there was never going to be a no-fly zone over Ukraine. I mean, the Ukrainians wanted it, but NATO operates in one of two modes in terms of military engagement. Most famous is Article 5, collective self-defense. An attack against one is an attack against all. It's been invoked one time after 9/11. The United States actually twisted NATO's arm to get them to say Article 5, because, I mean, yeah, there was a terrorist attack in the United States, but who's the enemy? And NATO's going, well, what do you want us to do? Okay, if we declare Article 5, what are we going to do? And so what they ended up doing is they sent some AWACS aircraft to fly patrols over the United States. Totally wasted effort, purely political. And then they sent out some Navy ships in the Med to stop migrants from coming in. I guess believing that Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda was going to try and invade Europe from the sea. That's it. Everybody's like, no, they went to Afghanistan. Article 5. No, Afghanistan, Article 4. That's the other one. Article 4 is where NATO determines that there is a situation that represents a threat to the national security or one or more members, and then they collectively decide that they're going to put troops in the way. That's NATO went into Libya, Article 4. NATO went into Afghanistan, Article 4. NATO went into did all their peacekeeping stuff in Kosovo, Article 4. Bosnia, Article 4. So in order for NATO to put a no-fly zone over Poland, it would have to be Article 4, which means that NATO would have to get together and agree. Now, there were some meetings. There were Article 4 meetings that were convened by Poland and the Baltic states. They said, what's going on in Ukraine represents a threat to us. So they convened Article 4 meetings. Turkey has convened Article 4 meetings for what was going on in Syria. But just because you convene an Article 4 meeting doesn't mean that NATO is going to respond. Because the collective has to get together. NATO does nothing unless by consensus. And so to agree to put aircraft over Ukraine would be to say, we're going to go to war with Russia. Because if you put aircraft over Ukraine, those aircraft are going to have to fight not only Russian aircraft, but Russian air defense, which means before you put aircraft over Ukraine, you have to take out Russian air defense. To give you an example, during the Gulf War, we wanted to bomb targets in Baghdad. Yay, that's what you do. But, you can't just go in and bomb the target in Baghdad. The first strikes we had to do, take out power grid. Why? Because power runs everything. The second thing you do is you take out the command and control centers, including what we called ATOCs, Aerial Tactical Operations Centers, and SOCs, Sector Operations Centers. They're part of their integrated air defense. So you take these out so they can't communicate. Then you have to pop all the radars. Before the airplanes went in, we sent in a special forces team and helicopters that blew up radars that were on the Iraqi-Saudi Arabia border, Task Force Normandy, took out the radars so the planes could go through without being detected. And then as the planes are moving in, we have these wild weasels. These are the guys that are flying around trying to get the radars to pick them up. Then they come in and fire some harm missiles off, pop the radars. And then we have to take out the air defense systems themselves. There's a whole crap load of airplanes out there doing anything but bombing the target we wanted to bomb to make it possible to bomb the target we wanted to bomb. So if you wanted to put a no-fly zone over Ukraine, you'd have to go to war with Russia, literally. And you'd have to be able to strike targets not just in Ukraine, but in Russia, because Russia has air defense systems like the S-300, S-400, the S-500, that have the ability to be based in Russia but control Ukrainian airspace. So now you have to bomb Russia. Hey, you might as well just take a knife, cut your own throat, and call it quits, because you're just basically saying, we want to go to nuclear war with Russia. And NATO doesn't want to go to nuclear war with Russia, which is why there will never be a no-fly zone over Ukraine. Who do you think shells civilians? Who do you think we know? Washington Post, Amnesty International, they don't like the Russians at all, but they are compelled to admit that the Ukrainians use civilians as human shields. That's their tactic. So if you're being blown up by a goddamn artillery shell and you're a civilian in Ukraine, it's the Ukrainian artillery that's doing it. Stupid son of a bitch. And yet you allowed yourself to be played like a fool for 60 minutes. Why? Well, because you live in Ukraine, and anybody who speaks out against the government is shot. That's the other part of the story I told you about. They don't even, Butcha. Let's remember what Butcha was. Butcha happened. First of all, there's two aspects of Butcha. It was a frontline fighting place. I mean, there was frontline fighting. The people that were in the Russian area lived quite well. The Russians did not abuse them. Now, there were some insurgents. There were people out there spying, and there were people doing the, we're going to, report the movement of the Russians to the Ukrainians. Those are spies, and they were arrested. And sometimes when you get arrested as for a spy, bad things happen to you. But the average Ukrainian who sat there and said, okay, we have Russians here, they weren't malnourished. The fact is, if they were hungry, the Russians gave them humanitarian aid package. That was a kiss of death. Should have done that, apparently, because if you accepted Russian food, you're now a collaborator. If you're somebody who, when the Russians came up and said, hey, we want to do a contract with you, we'd like to exchange dry goods for your dairy products. They go, okay, we're in the business here. You do that, kiss of death. You just collaborate with the Russians. Fact is, anybody who talked to the Russians, anybody who did anything, if you're a school goddamn teacher and you continue to teach your school or teach sports while you're occupied by the Russians, you're a traitor. They literally arrest you, take you in the backwoods, and they shoot you, they being the Ukrainians. We know this as a fact. The people that were filmed dead between April 1st and 2nd, the Russians had already left days ago. These are people that woke up to hear a broadcast from a Ukrainian government official saying, stay in your homes. The security forces will be conducting a cleansing operation. Do not be alarmed at the gunfire. Stay in your homes. And they went, what the hell do they mean by cleansing operation? Then they got on the internet. Boom, there's the security services safari unit. As a battalion adjunct, these are the bad neo-Nazi guys that kill everybody. And they said, we're going to be going in and cleansing the area of the collaborators. Anybody who dealt with the Russians. And they went, holy shit, I dealt with the Russians. So they put on the white armband, they got on their bicycle, they grabbed their stuff, and they started pedaling towards the Russian line. And in comes Safari, and they kill them, shoot them. They don't, or capture you, then they take you to an alley, tie your hands behind the back, pop you in the back of the head. There's the bodies all over the place, freshly killed bodies. And then the journalists come in and go, oh, look, dead people. And the Ukrainians go, the Russians did this. The Russians did this. And everybody went, oh, my God, yes, the Russians did, because it was part of a script. Zelensky came in. Everybody came in and started crying, oh, Butcha, the Butcha massacre. Why were they doing this? At the same time this was happening, Zelensky had a team in Istanbul negotiating with the Russians. And we now know, everybody admits it, there was going to be a deal. One of the reasons why the Russians pulled back from Kiev was to say, look, we're buying space. We're showing a good faith thing. We're willing to make a deal here. We're willing to bring this whole conflict to an end. And the Ukrainians were at the table. Boris Johnson flew in. Boris Johnson, Prime Minister of Great Britain, flew in on the instructions of Joe Biden. And he said, no deal. If you cut a deal, we don't support you. All our support's done. No deal, you got to keep fighting. Well, the Ukrainians are like, wait a minute, we wanted that deal because we're sort of getting our asses kicked. We'd like to end this war. If you want us to do this, we're going to need weapons and everything. So the thing was done. How do we get the world to agree to give Ukraine money and weapons? The Butcha massacre. The Russians become the evil thugs. This is pure wartime propaganda. Turn the Russians into the most rapacious, thuggish people on the planet, and then sell them up as the Ukrainians are the good guys. Zelensky's now Winston Churchill. He's King Leonidas in the 300. And there it is, Xerxes, evil, with his billion-man immortals coming in to rape everybody. And that's the story they told. How do we know? Why do we know this is true? Because the Ukrainians admit it. They had one lady, their director of a humanitarian, whatever she was, out there saying, the Russians raped 25 girls. 16 of them were 9 years old. And they raped them so they could never have babies. No Ukrainian babies. Look how evil those Russians are. They purposely raped the girls so they could never have babies. Wham, wham, wham. And the Ukrainians went, finally everybody went, because journalists, at some point in time, even the worst journalist in the world has to go, I'd like to speak to one of these girls who got raped. And couldn't find any. Why? They didn't exist. And even the Ukrainian government went, oh, damn, she embarrassed us. So they fired her, May 31st. And she was interviewed about it. And they said, well, why'd you lie? She said, look, I was in Italy. And the party was telling us, we ain't giving you any money for Ukraine. We're not doing that nonsense. So I made up a story about raped women. And by the time I finished it, I said, we're going to give you all the weapons you want. So that's what Butcha was. And so what I talk about is the Butcha effect. When Kharkov fell in September, the Ukrainians were doing the same thing, going in trying to create the new Butcha, new mass graves, new everything. It didn't work because this time the Ukrainians weren't being as clever as they were before. This time they literally were filming them, digging the graves. You look down there and there they are, the bodies, hands tied behind the back, women and men in civilian clothes, and they take the man up to the top of the hill, pop him in the head, body rolls down in the grave, and they're laughing about it. They got a guy on camera telling the Ukrainian journalist, he goes, yeah, well, we don't have time to send them in jail. Well, what do you do with them? They disappear. So many of them disappear. There's going to have to be a census after the war to figure out how many disappeared. The man just admitted to mass murder. And even the Western journalists had to sit there and say, holy shit, we can't tell this story. So they stopped telling the new Butcha story. So what does 60 Minutes do? When you can't tell the new story, you resurrect the old story. And that's what 60 Minutes just did, because they got nothing to tell right now. There are no war crimes they can expose about the Russians, because all the war crimes are being committed by the Ukrainians. But you have to keep the interest going. You have to continue to tell the world that the Russians are bad. So you go back to the time-tested story, Butcha, and you breathe new life into it. It's total, utter bullshit. It was bullshit back then. It's bullshit today, and that's why I wrote the piece. I think they're scared to tell the truth. I think they're scared to death to tell the truth because they know what happens to anybody who tells the truth. You're immediately criminalized. You can't tell the truth about Russia. You can't sit there and say, this is what really happened. Where's the forensics? I mean, come on, damn it. Ukraine owns the damn crime scene. Where's the forensics? All the bodies, they were found. Show me where they were shot. Show me where the bullets came from. Give me the bullet. Let me put it under a microscope and look at the rifling on it. Did it come from an AK-47 type weapon used by the Ukrainians, or did it come from, some sort of AK-12 new thing with a tighter rifling from the Russians? I know how to do a damn forensic investigation. I know exactly what to look for. Nobody's doing that. All these glorified war crimes people, what the hell are you doing? Interviewing people controlled by the Ukrainians? You know you can't do that. I know you can't do that. Why? Because I used to do that very kind of investigation. You can't go to people who claim that they were attacked with chemical weapons and take direct testimony like that in a controlled environment. That testimony is worthless. You have to go in and get the forensic data. Now, you can gather that evidence from them to guide you. If they say something happened on a certain date, then you can go and investigate that. But you can't use the words of people talking about a controversial topic when they're in a controlled environment where the people controlling them kill people who say things they don't want them to say. So you can't trust anybody who was interviewed by 60 Minutes, and you shouldn't. You should be doing forensics. Let me loose. But if I went to Ukraine, they'd kill me. But I'm just telling you right now, even at this late date, I could go in there and come up with definitive proof about who killed what. Each weapon leaves a signature. Each weapon leaves a signature. And each weapon, because the two militaries, the Ukrainian military was using primarily old Soviet-era weapons. The Russians were using newer model weapons produced by Russia after the fact. Each one of them has a unique signature. I could reconstruct that scene perfectly. So could anybody else. There's people 20 times better than me that could do this job. Why aren't they doing it? Why aren't they doing it? Because they don't want the truth. They want the narrative that they've sold. They want to propagate that narrative. That's what it's about.
Considering that Germany will freeze this winter to death for many, what do you think will happen to the second biggest American military bases after Japan there?
Well, I can guarantee you that the American military bases will not freeze to death. And this should generate a whole level of ire amongst the Germans. Double standard. Hey, Germany, you're an occupied nation. You're second-class citizens. Let me make it even better for you, Germany. America blew up your damn Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines, and your government's too damn afraid to say anything about it. Okay, how's that make you feel? Not only do we listen in on the telephone calls of your leadership, Angela Merkel's private cell phone was intercepted by the National Security Agency, and the Germans didn't do a damn thing about it. Why? Sheep. It's the sheep effect. You're a bunch of little lambs being led to the slaughter by the American shepherd. I mean, come on, guys. Wake up. We blew up your pipeline. We blew up your pipeline. And now you have no alternative. What? You could have turned on Nord Stream 2. You still can. There's one pipeline left, but you're not going to because sheep don't do anything on their own. No, you're just going to sit there and freeze to death. Or the shepherd's going to come and he's going to offer you American liquid natural gas. All right. That's okay. We got a good deal for you because you're our friends. We're going to sell it to you at 5 times the market rate. I'm sorry, we're going to make a lot of money. As Anthony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, said, these are great opportunities that have come from the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline. No, this is a tragedy for Germany. I mean, this is, as the question said, people are going to die this winter. The elderly, children, the sick, the infirm. Maybe sick and infirm is the same thing. But the point is, people are going to die, and they're going to die in large numbers, depending on how cold this winter gets. Germany's supposed to be this first-class nation, high standard of living, great infrastructure, great technology. Germany's going down to third world status here, and it's going to get worse. What happens when your jobs shut down? What happens when the factories close? What happens when the people are unemployed? What happens when the tax base goes away? What happens when the mark collapses? When Deutsche Bank folds? I mean, come on. The United States did this to you, not Russia. I mean, that's the big awakening that has to come in Europe, not just Germany, but everywhere else, is to look in the mirror and realize that everything bad that's happening to you right now is because of the United States. That your best friend out there is Russia. Russia would be willing to sell you gas at reasonable prices. You wouldn't see my God, could you imagine what the world would be saying if Russia came in and said, yeah, we'll sell you gas. We know you really need it. 10 times the market price. They'd be going, oh my God, they've weaponized energy. The Russians are horrible. They're pigs. They're disgusting. America comes in and goes, we'll sell you liquid natural gas 10 times market price. Oh, thank you, America. You're our best friend we've ever had in our life. We wouldn't be able to live without you. No, you're going to die because of us. No, Germany's just in for a hard time. I believe that there's going to be a revolutionary change in Germany. I don't think the Schultz government lasts this winter. I don't think the current coalition, the pieces that make coalitions aren't going to survive. I think this is going to be something new. I think the will of the people is going to be manifested. In Germany, a lot of people don't realize, but there's 2 Germanys. There's the former East Germany, and then there's the former West Germany. And West Germany's full of fat pigs who just sit around and suck up money and live well. East Germany's full of people who are still living a tough life. They haven't quite risen up to the level. And there's a lot of resentment in the East about the West, especially what's going on right now. And I don't know. Let's see what happens with Germany. A unified Germany may not be too unified by the time this is finished.